Welcome to Simple Conversation with ASG.
Follow your new favorite podcast host with a link in the description.
So tell me, who is Scott Kolbaba?
I'm an internist and that practices general medicine in Wheaton, Illinois, which is a suburb of Chicago. It's just getting to be nice out here, and the weather is about 70 degrees, the sun's shining, and it's a perfect day. I see whatever comes through the door. Basically, I take care of adult medicine, and I've done this for 40 years. It's hard to believe. I know I look a lot younger than that. I'm just kidding. But I enjoy what I do. I love to see and take care of families and patients. I also work at Northwestern University at Senator DuPage Hospital in the adolescent psychiatric unit. And I see patients that come in there for physicals and kind of assess their medical needs. And that's one of the things that's gotten me interested in what I'm doing. But before I get into that, let me tell you a little bit more about myself. I've got 7 children. We just had a baby, not myself, but my daughter just had a baby yesterday. We're excited about that. My wife's there right now.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Everyone's doing well. And so we've got, like I said, 7 kids. That's our 13th grandchild. They're all doing well. No one's in jail, which is a low bar. But and then one of the things they accuse me of is doing things in a big way. I have a big family, obviously. I like to fly big to the beach, and we've got a number of kites, a big whale kite and an octopus kite that are about 75 feet long, and you can see them from miles around, so I enjoy that. We have a Newfoundland dog who's 150 pounds and very lovey, and we've grown the championship pumpkins in the Illinois Pumpkin Festival a couple of years running. So we've gotten the biggest pumpkin. So we enjoy these crazy things and in a big way. What got me interested in the topic that we're talking about today, which is teen depression, is a little girl that was admitted to the emergency room at a local hospital, and I was called to see her. And as I walked into the room, there was bustling going around me in the emergency room like usual. But inside the room, I could hear sobbing. And when I walked in, there was a mom there just sobbing uncontrollably. Her little daughter, who was 13 years old, just a beautiful little girl, was lying there in a coma, a deep coma from a drug overdose. She had been depressed and had taken a drug overdose to kill herself. The first thing we did, obviously, was assess her vitals. We got her into the ICU, intubated, and she recovered eventually. But that changed me, and I thought about that for quite a long time, and why a beautiful 13-year-old girl would commit suicide. It almost did it. Have committed suicide, but this one just for some reason just made me realize that I need to do something about this. And the first thing I thought I would do is write a book, and it's called Clara's Magic Garden. It's an Amazon bestseller now. It's a kid's book about a little girl that doesn't have any friends, who doesn't think she has any friends, doesn't think she's pretty, doesn't think she is smart enough, and all the things that lots and lots of little girls think about themselves. And she goes through a magic garden and then becomes transformed by her association with a little magic bush. And she becomes self-confident and realizes she does have some importance. And that was my first attempt to help girls, especially, who are more subject to depression than boys for some reason, to realize that they are important. They do have a purpose in this life. And so that was my first thing. And then I decided that I need to promote one of the things that I realized was so important, and that is purpose. And so I've been on speaking tours and speaking engagements, promoting purpose as a potential cure for the epidemic of depression in this country. Talk about that in a little bit, and I can give you some statistics too. So that's what I do in my abundant leisure time, sometime between midnight and 2 a.m. I think of myself as somewhat of a sappy do-gooder. I like to do something good in the world. I think that's what we're all about. And so that's my project. That's my purpose, actually, is to help young girls, especially and young boys, realize they do have an importance and they do have a purpose in this life.
This is going to be quite the episode, I can already tell, with all the information you give me for the topics that I wrote down. But you mentioned a word there that, for me, is one of the most hated words on the planet right now, which is purpose, because every guru and self-improvement coach is preaching it, but they have yet to give a definition of what it is. So people maybe that are watching it, people listening to this that are maybe thinking they're a little bit lost and they're trying to find this quote-unquote purpose. Can you give a little bit of information on what these people are talking about when they say find your purpose?
Sure. I'm not sure exactly what they're talking about, but what I'm talking about is some of the definitions from the American psychiatric societies, and the purpose in a teenager, for example, in the young kids, would be realizing and finding your passion, what you love. And when I admit kids to the psychiatric unit, I will frequently ask them, what do you like to do? What turns you on? And they all have something. That's very interesting. They all have something that turns them on. Many of them like to write. Some like to draw and paint. Some like sports. Everyone has something. And then what we're trying to accomplish is to have them convert that passion into a purpose. And the purpose is using that passion to help someone else in the world, to help a cause, to do some good in the world. So purpose starts out as a passion. You direct your passion to doing the things that you love, and then using that to help someone else. For example, there's a story about a fellow that was involved with a long depression. Kevin Hines. I don't know if you've ever heard the name Kevin Hines.
No.
He's become an international spokesperson for finding your purpose in depression. And Kevin was depressed, like I said, for a long time. He decided after the breakup of his girlfriend and the death of a very close drama teacher that he was going to commit suicide. So he took a bus in San Francisco, took a bus to the City College. He then hugged his dad goodbye, because he thought it would be the last time that he would ever see his dad. And he then walked to or took a ride to the Golden Gate Bridge. There he found there's a woman that was asking him to take her picture, and he did that. After he took her picture, he gave the camera back to her, then climbed up on the bar and the gate to where the water, you can jump into the water, and he leaped. He ultimately was going 75 miles an hour, and the distance is a little over 200 feet down to the water. He landed headfirst, and as soon as he jumped, he realized that he didn't want to commit suicide anymore. Can you imagine? Realizing most people that jump off the bridge do commit suicide. It's rare that people survive that fall. And so he went down 70 feet into the water. He was waterlogged. He came up very slowly. He was really short of breath and was weak because he became paralyzed from the waist down, at least temporarily, from the trauma and the fractures of his spine. And he bobbed up to the surface. When he came to the surface, he saw this fin going around him, and he realized, here, I made it. I survived this fall. Now there's a shark that's going to be eating me of all the luck. It wasn't he found out later it wasn't a shark. It was a sea lion. And the sea lion, interestingly, talk about divine intervention. When Kevin was sinking down into the water, because he was all waterlogged and his boots were waterlogged, he couldn't move his legs. The sea lion swam underneath him and buoyed him up, and that happened for many minutes. Well, that the sea lion did this. Who knows why? Until the Coast Guard could rescue him, and he was rescued by the Coast Guard. He was brought to a hospital, obviously, where he was there for weeks, and then to a psychiatric hospital. And he determined that what what this taught him, this whole suicide attempt, was that he needed to do something to prevent other people from doing that. So he became a spokesman for depression, mental illness, and suicide. And he has now helped literally tens of thousands of people around the world because his purpose and his passion is helping others not go through what he went through. So that is, he discovered his purpose and his passion. And he still is talking, and he gets letters and emails and things all the time saying, thank you for saving my life. He literally is saving people's lives. So this is an example of finding your purpose. He found his purpose. It basically eliminated his depression, and he now is helping others around the world. And what a wonderful thing. And if you can think of people that have done that kind of a thing, they are happy people. They wake up in the morning with a passion to do their purpose. And that's how I would define purpose.
It's quite an amazing story. I have actually seen Kevin Hine's name under his documentary he's got, The Ripple Effect. And
yes,
it is an incredible story, and it's got, when you look at where he is now, as you said, that he's an advocate and he's helping people, it is quite an inspiring story. But something that I did actually think of there when you were telling that story, which is obviously to find someone's purpose, it's not as difficult as people do make out. It is a case of finding their passions, finding then who they could help and then how they could do it. But something that came into my mind was, do you think there's maybe a pull away in terms of finding purpose now today, with maybe education not focusing on kids' talents and this sudden need for teenagers to get rich? Do you think that maybe pulls away from them genuinely sitting down and pursuing their purpose?
I think in schools, I think it would be really awesome if we could help the kids find their purpose and pursue that. And that's been shown to help improve, if they do that. That improves grades, it improves health, believe it or not. It reduces the risk of depression, and kids are happier. They wake up in the morning looking forward to doing something with their purpose that day. And so I think if we could have schools focus on that, developing that would be awesome. And the big thing that I think is important is that parents pursue finding a purpose for their kids, and that starts out with the parents having a purpose too. So the kids emulate their parents a great deal. So if a parent has a purpose, that's helpful. But what the parents need to do is talk with the kid and find out what their purpose is. Now, I don't know how old you are, but we've had 7 kids. And, when you talk with your kids, it frequently goes something like this. Hi, Dane, how was your day? Fine. What'd you do in school? Nothing. Okay. And so how do you talk to your kids in a deeper level? And what we found was very helpful is taking a walk. We live on a circular road that is about a half a mile in a circle, and we take the kids individually for a walk, and we say, let's go for a walk, and they love it. As a matter of fact, when they move, all of them have moved away now. We're empty nesters, but when we still talk with them, they say, gee, Dad, I love those walks that we went on. And when they visit, they'll ask to go on a walk again. And what happens on a walk? What happens is into a little deeper conversation about, what are you thinking? How are you doing in school? And that makes for an easier way to find out what their passions are. So when I was a kid, I remember I became passionate about hot air balloons. That sounds like a crazy thing to become passionate about. But, purposes can change throughout your life. You don't have to have the same purpose all your life. It can change. And one of the things that my parents did, now my parents were really a lot smarter than I gave them credit for when I was a kid. They helped me pursue that passion. And so what they would do is we would go around to hot air balloon festivals in the Midwest and in Chicagoland area. And we would watch the balloonists, we talk with them, and it was thrilling for me to have them encourage me in that passion. I even had a barrel, an oil barrel that I washed out really carefully and put hot coals in there. And then I got the vacuum cleaner from inside the house, put it on reverse so you could blow air out. And I blew air into the hot air into the coals. And then the outlet for the barrel was a stream of hot air. And I got a weather balloon and hooked it up there and thought this would be a great hot air balloon idea. But unfortunately, the air cooled off too quickly. But they helped me pursue that, and I think that gave me a reason to get up in the morning. I was excited about that. It also gave me some experience in projects like that. I've we all have projects to do, and this is a kind of a long-term project. So it's really important that parents help, or any significant other. It could be an uncle, it could be a neighbor. But if you help a kid pursue their passion, that goes a long way to saving that kid from depression. 3 out of 5 teenage girls in this country today, and I'm sure the same is true in Ireland, are depressed. And one in three girls now have actively considered suicide as an alternative. That's a huge problem. And then helping kids get a purpose. And like I said, it doesn't have to be a parent, and it doesn't have to be a long commitment. It doesn't have to be every day you do something with the kid. Like I said, I've got 13 grandkids now, and a few years ago, most of them live in Phoenix for some reason. They don't like the Chicago winters. And I was visiting my kids and my grandkids, and I said, well, let's go fishing. Now, Phoenix is a pretty hot, dry area. There aren't many water holes in Phoenix. There aren't many fish in Phoenix. But we got some fish poles and went out to this little water hole in the middle of Phoenix in the middle of the desert, and we went fishing for about 2 hours. And neither of the kids hooked their ears or anything else. So no body parts were violated. And we hooked a couple trees and things like that. But we had some fun. But I thought at the end of that, we spent 2 hours. We never saw a fish. They never caught a fish. And I thought, what a waste of time. At the time, I thought that this is a poor, unfortunate situation where I took the kids out to go fishing. We didn't see anything, and it was a failure. Then about 2 or 3 years later, the little one that I took out came up to me, Wyatt, and Wyatt said, "Grampy, you know that fishing trip we took a couple of years ago?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "This always gets me. That was the best day of my life." Can you imagine?
Amazing.
It doesn't take much to help a kid develop a passion, and they are fishermen now, to develop a passion and pursue that passion to become their purpose. So little things can make a huge difference. So it doesn't have to be a major commitment. So that's kind of what I think is important in developing a purpose, is having someone mentor you, and it can be anyone. It can be a friend, it can be a parent, it can be especially the parents. And what we're facing in this country, and I'm sure in Ireland and all countries, is busier and busier parents. You need a 2-parent working family to make a living these days, and especially with inflation being what it is, our kids are struggling. So it's really hard to find a time commitment. But if you can spend a little time helping your kids pursue their passion and develop a purpose, that will go a long way to making them happy kids, healthier, more productive, and
We've spoke there about support and supporting someone's purpose, but we have to also talk about the flip side, because I know it's quite common in the UK, definitely. I don't know, but I imagine in America it's the same, but these kids do have kind of a purpose, like say writing or drawing, and they had to put a lot of time into honing their craft and getting better at it. But with that becomes a little bit of isolation, and with isolation, then the group of people that are trying to be popular, they're going to obviously ostracize that person that's trying to move away from the crowd. So if someone is trying to fulfill their purpose, where they need to do that isolation, they need to be a little bit lonely, they have to kind of surround themselves with someone a little bit more supportive, but they're going to obviously get that flack and that hate from the other crowds. How could they not push against it, but kind of resist the temptation to just give it up and go back to what everyone else was doing?
Sure. Uh, one of the principles of finding your purpose is using that to help someone else, or help some organization, or help something in the world. So these kids like Kevin Hines, for example, they have found their purpose and are using it to help others. So that's, as far as isolation. If you're drawing, or if art's your purpose, then what you need to do is get involved with other kids that are doing the same thing. Have an organization. Pursue this with little kids and help them learn how to draw or paint or whatever. So that's part of that whole thing, is to become more social and not less social, and that's part of that whole purpose theme, that you'll help others with what you're doing. So you may be ostracized by some, but I think the whole purpose is to use your purpose to be involved with others, and to help them overcome what that might be their depression also.
The whole process of finding your purpose is obviously, it's not instant, it's not very quick. It's going to be a slow burn. It's a lot of challenges, a lot of setbacks you have to overcome. And with today's ever-growing social media era, being in the glamours of life are always documented, and it's very rare that the hard work involved is documented. So kids are going to see these people, maybe their age, with loads of money and loads of attention and loads of numbers on a screen, and that could very easily derail them, because they're not in that position, and they're maybe been doing things towards their purpose for longer than those kids. How would you advise someone who is in that process of finding their purpose, or maybe they're working with their purpose right now, that is having a little bit of a slow push towards where they want to be? How would you give them advice on staying away from those kind of distractions of comparing yourself to other people?
Social media, I think, is one of the big causes of depression in our society. Before the pandemic, people would get together. They would be more one-on-one or one with a group. But after, during the pandemic, we had to isolate somewhat. And so people became more and more involved with social media. And you're absolutely right. Social media portrays what people are trying to portray. I've got a wonderful life, and here's proof. I took this wonderful vacation. I have wonderful clothes. I have a wonderful life. No one, you're right, wants to say that they are a failure, that they're not succeeding in school or in life or whatever. So when you see that, and you see that continuously, it's human nature to think that you are not as successful as everyone else that's on social media. And so there are a number of people that have gone through this and have been given their advice. One, let's see if I can think of one. Alyssa Young worked for Lee Health in Ohio, and she was in charge for the hospital organization of 26 social media accounts. And she would try to portray the hospital in good terms, and show how people were succeeding and getting better and so forth, and their stories. And she started to get comments back that people would hate her, and this bullying kind of stuff, which is incredibly dangerous. The CDC feels that people that are bullied are 2 to 9 times more likely to commit suicide than the general population that hasn't been bullied. And so she went through this and ultimately realized that she was trying to be her perfect self. She would go back and look at the pictures that she posted on social media, and if her hairdo wasn't perfect, she'd remove those pictures. And crazy that she decided not to be involved with social media anymore, and she wanted to be involved more with one-on-one conversations and meetings with her friends, and not so much on social media. She also realized that someone else's success doesn't take away from her success, and that there's always someone that thinks that they're more successful than you, and that's fine. And she realized and after that, she became a much happier and more contented person. And now she uses social media a lot less and is a lot happier. And so I think kids need to realize that that's the case. And there are some advocates that are saying restrict their kids' use of social media, so many hours a day, and not 100% of the time. And I think that's reasonable advice. And get more involved with talking to people. Our kids, for example, when we have family outings and things, we'll sometimes be in the same room, and my kids will text me instead of talking to me in the same room. You believe that? And that's how crazy it's gotten. So I think social media is a wonderful thing to be able to communicate with people, but if it's overdone or taken the wrong way, it's very destructive, and it's probably one of the most common causes now of depression in teens.
One of my first guests that I had on the podcast has 7 boys, and he mentioned trying to restrict their phone usage and social media usage as much as possible. And he had some app that linked their screen time to his phone. So when I got to a certain point, he could stop them using their phone. And it was something that after he mentioned it, obviously because your phone's listening to you, it popped up in my feed on Twitter that they done a poll of kids in a school of what their screen time was. And a lot of it was pretty normal, but they had an other section. And in the other section, there was an unbelievable amount of kids that had 13 hours screen time a day, 15 hours. There was kids that had 20 hours screen time. And it was just perking in my mind. Do you think there is kind of a correlation between the amount of time a kid spends on their phone and social media specifically that will translate into maybe not having depression directly, but definitely moving into that kind of funnel of bad feelings constantly?
For sure. Social media is all about showing your best and one-upping everyone else. I'm better because I'm this and that. And that, if you're exposed to that, for 20 hours or 10 hours or whatever it is per day, I'm not as good as everyone else. And that's the feeling people get. And they don't realize how valuable they really are and how important they really are. And so I agree that is way too much. And that does contribute to feeling inferior and feeling depressed. I'm certain of it.
That kind of habit of being on your phone all the time and building up that screen time could be seen kind of as an escape for some aspect of their life. And a big aspect of that would be bullying, which it's very common now, unfortunately. So as a parent, is there any kind of precautions you can take to minimize the amount of bullying that may happen to your kid?
Let me tell you a quick story about my daughter. My daughter, we adopted a bunch of kids. I'm not sure how many anymore, but my daughter was adopted. She's half black and half white. And when she was in grade school, she was bullied by a kid on the bus. And she's kind of a pretty girl. She's got dark skin and beautiful blue eyes. And so she was being bullied by this kid incessantly every day, and she was afraid to get on the bus anymore. So in our family, the older boys tend to look after the rest of the kids, especially the girls. So my son Nate, who's a big football player, dressed up in his football uniform one day, at least the top, with his shoulder pads and his jersey, and got on the bus with Jordan. And he said, "Well, who's the kid that's giving you a hard time?" And she pointed him out, and Nathan went up to him and said, "If you give my daughter my sister any trouble anymore, you're going to answer to me." And that was all. All of a sudden, bullying was over, and it never happened again. But as far as what parents can do, you need to validate with the kid that's being bullied that I understand that it's upsetting, and I know what you're going through. It's not, you're not crazy, and you give some emotional support, and tell them how you love them, and so coping strategies. And coping strategies would be things like keeping a journal, for example, writing down your emotions. And sometimes just writing things out helps clear the air and makes you a little happier. And then help them find something that they're passionate about. Again, this whole concept of finding your purpose, because if you can focus on that and not so much the bullying, that will make a difference. And then parents can always go to the teacher and other authorities in the school and mention that what's happening to their kid. And we've done that in the past, because we again, with 7 kids, invariably someone gets bullied off and on, and that's also worked for us. But again, and then turning them into other things like athletics and something where they can expend their energy is also helpful for a situation that involves bullying. But it's very common. It's very common in social media, and it's unfortunate, but that's what we have to deal with. And I think as parents or guardians or significant others, we can help the kid focus on other things other than the bullying, and stop the bullying. That's really important.
You've always spoke about your daughter, and you spoke earlier about the girl in your hospital that dealt with depression, and is going to be something that I think is going to shock a lot of people, because the whole stigma at the minute is that men's mental health and boys' mental health, but we do forget the other side. Something that you pointed out whenever you sent me some information before the podcast, and something I've done my own research on that I was actually very shocked about, is that girls and women are more affected by depression than men and boys.
Yes, yeah, it's about twice. Girls are more likely to be depressed than boys, and the figure from CDC's Center for Disease Control is about twice. Now, I was thinking about what is it that causes girls to be more depressed than boys, and the other interesting statistic is when you talk about depression, again, twice as many girls as boys. When you talk about suicide, about 3 times as many boys actually commit suicide than girls. And that's we'll talk about that in a second. But in trying to understand why girls are more likely to be depressed, when you think about social media, for example, girls are much more concerned about their appearance, their hair, and so forth. How many guys could care less about their hair that's messy and whatever? They're not concerned about that. But the girls are more concerned about their appearance, what they're doing, and boys are not quite as sensitive as girls. So I think it's the sensitivity that makes the girls more likely to be devastated, literally, by bullying or social media or just being on social media. And so I think that's why the girls tend to be twice as depressed. The frequency is twice as much as the boys. Now, the girls, when we see a lot of girls and boys that have tried to commit suicide in the unit where I work. And when you see the girls that are admitted, many times they'll take a drug overdose, not a lot of pills, maybe, it's like 10 pills instead of 100 pills that somebody that really is hardcore about committing suicide. And then they'll call their friends and tell them, it's like reaching out for help. And the boy, or they'll cut their wrists with a little razor, but not cut deeply enough to cut into the artery, which is what needs to be done if you really want to bleed to death and commit suicide. And so those are more gestures than they are true suicide attempts. The boys, on the other hand, would and more often than the girls, do things like shoot themselves, 54% of the suicides are with firearms. 54%. 25% are with hanging or similar kinds of strangulation, and 12% are with poison or drugs. And so when the boys are involved with a suicide, they tend to get very serious, and they tend to, in many cases, complete the act, because when you hold the gun to your head and pull the trigger, that's usually it.
It's a very terrifying stat whenever you think about it. I know it's kind of uneasy to hear because, as you said, there's double amount of women compared to men that are affected by depression. But
Yes.
then there's more of a finishing rate for men that are suffering from it, and it's a little bit, because it puts it in perspective a lot. But do you think that anything to do with, men actually taking their own lives is to do with the pressures that they're kind of feeling from society?
So a whole bunch of things. It's not just one thing, but pressures are a big factor in depression. As a matter of fact, the pressure of school is a big one here. And what's interesting is we have a psych unit that holds about, I think about 16 kids. And in the summertime, when school's out, they close the psych unit down because there are very few admissions. And if there is an admission, they go to the adult psych unit and not the adolescent psych unit. So the pressure of school is enormous. And so those are some of the pressures that the kids are subject to. And in school, you have the pressure of academics. You have the pressure of your self-worth and self-appearance. You have the pressure of bullying. And those are all things that happen in the school. And again, in the summertime, a lot of that's relieved. And again, we were able to totally close the psychiatric unit. But the day school starts again, within a week, we fill up. And it's very, very interesting what happens. So social pressures and academic pressures are a huge factor in depression in kids.
Is there any way at all that can be eased? Like, I understand pressures from school are always going to be there. I remember whenever I was a kid having pressures in school, and I know before my time there was people who were having pressures in school. But is there any way at all that can be eased? Because it does seem from an outsider looking in like it's one of those pressures that's always going to be there.
Yeah. It's always going to be there, and it's always there for literally every kid that goes to school. There's some pressure to in academics to perform, and there's also peer pressure that you get more in school when you're face to face with kids that are causing some of this peer pressure. So the question is, what can you do about that? I think my daughter-in-law is a social worker in Houston, and she is able to meet with these kids and the ones that are starting to get in trouble. And I think having a good social service organization in schools is very helpful. And I think we need to probably emphasize that a little bit more. Some of these kids come from some of the stories she tells me are just absolutely incredible. Both parents are drug addicts, or one parent is out of the house and the other one is never home. They're working 3 jobs to keep the food on the table, and so I think as far as what schools can do, I think having a little more mental health assistance, and it doesn't have to be a high-powered psychiatrist or psychologist. It can just be any counselor or social worker can help these kids, and then involving the parents as much as they can. But again, that's part of the problem with our generation, and that is the parents are busy, and sometimes they're not able to help the kids out, and that, so there's lots and lots of issues here. But I think having a little more mental health service in the schools would be helpful for the kids with this academic pressure.
You mentioned that whenever school's out, there is quite a significant lowering in the amount in the rate of depression in these kids. But we do also have to talk about a time where that rule didn't really apply, which was COVID. And even though there was no schools, there was really no work, the mental health crisis shot through the roof, and terrifyingly so, it hasn't really dropped. What do you think in that specific period, because it shot up in such a short period of time to numbers that people didn't really think were ever possible? What do you think it was about that pandemic that triggered that?
That's what we're facing. We're facing the fallout from that. And what I think happened in the pandemic is people were isolated. And we're a social man and women are social beings, and you need social contact, and the internet and so like being with someone or being with a group or talking with a group. So I think as human beings, we need to have that interaction, the social interaction of actually being with a person. It's not as good to be just doing it by text or social media. And the other thing I think that happened was that people got more involved with social media during this pandemic. And then you ran into all the stuff that we talked about before with social media, and that is the bullying and the one-upsmanship that we're seeing. And so the combination of those two, I think, was accelerated the epidemic of teen depression in this country. And it's now twice as prevalent as it was 10 years ago, which is really something. And I think it's going to take us a long time to unwind that problem, which now has become the social media problem that we're seeing. So I think that's why we had such a huge uptick in depression. And again, I think this part of the solution for that is having kids find what they love and to pursue that and to help others, because that involves becoming social with others with your passion. And I think that's going to be one of the solutions to unwinding this huge uptick in depression in teenagers today.
It could definitely help things 100%, but there was something that I read on Twitter recently that people were saying that obviously this rise of social media usage during the pandemic definitely spiked it, and it was 100%, may not have been the sole contributor, but it was definitely the main. And the problem with that is, as obviously people were isolated, they were stuck in houses, they didn't really have any contact with people. Neither did the developers of these social media platforms. So all they did was just plan how they could push out more platforms, they could make apps more complex, they could add more elements of it. And the problem is now these concepts and ideas they had in COVID are starting to roll out. We're seeing a lot now with different platforms like YouTube and the streaming platforms, where there's millions of them for every different genre you could think of. Do you think that kind of innovation of social media, where it's very clear that that's where the focus is, that's where everybody wants to make the new ideas, they want to be the next big social media creator? Gary Vee's talked about it, how he knows people creating social media platforms that don't even exist yet, and they've been doing it for about 10 years now. And do you think that kind of push towards the digital era is going to make this crisis worse?
I think it probably will. And there's some legislation now that they're working on in Congress in this country about social media platforms and what kinds of things they're allowing to exist. And I think people are and people in authority are finding that these social platforms are contributing to the unrest in young folks. And one of those would be allowing this bullying, this anonymous bullying. That's a big one that they're working on to help stop those platforms from allowing that to happen. So I think there's some things that people are realizing that need to be changed, and hopefully they will change. But so far the social media platforms have been totally oblivious to that kind of a thing, and hopefully in the near future, they'll be reined in a little bit, and you won't be able to so easily bully someone anonymously over social media.
Yeah, I think the digital age is just, there's no end to it really, and it's unfortunately it's going to raise some questions about how society reacts to it. But we'll try and move away from, well, social media, but obviously it's going to still play a part when we talk about these topics. But something that popped into my head was, as I was researching this, obviously I was going to go down the rabbit hole and read into people that have had mental health issues and listen to their stories. And the big thing that I kept seeing over and over again was they were mentioning that they saw their parents break down over the course of their spell with depression. And that's very, very common. It's actually a lot more common than people actually talk about, is parents just almost completely being broke by the process. As a parent, is there anything that you would give advice to parents who maybe they have got children or they have got loved ones that are suffering at the minute, how they could help them and not let it get to them as well?
Um, what we're seeing with the home situation is one of the big contributors also to teen depression. And so when there's a dysfunctional family situation, that goes a long way to causing teen depression. When I was in my training in medical school, there was a psychiatrist that I rotated through, a child psychiatrist, and it was just amazing to see him interview a kid and then the family, and to come up with what was going on and causing this kid to act up and be depressed. And one of the big things that I observed just in the short weeks that I was there was that a breakdown in the family is a huge cause of depression, and especially divorce or separation. The kids in now, divorce is something that people that can't live together probably shouldn't be together, but the actual process of divorce is so harmful to kids that they never get over that. And they blame them. In many cases, I've observed that they blame themselves. I was causing too much problem. My grades weren't good enough or whatever that caused my parents to separate. So that's a huge thing. And then what we're seeing now, one of the big things that cause strife in families and between parents is money. And what we're seeing now is, with inflation going up, there are lots of people that have been functioning at a kind of a marginal level. We've got a couple kids, like I said, all the kids are out of the house, they all have jobs. And what we're seeing is, with inflation being in this country about 30% increase over the last cost of goods and services, about 30% increase over the last couple years, 3 years, is there's more stress because people aren't able to make ends meet, and they've got bills piling up, and then something happens, the car breaks down, or there's a medical bill or something like that, and then that just pushes you over. We've been able to help a couple of our kids out because I've got a good job, and they may be working really hard, both of them, but they still are in trouble. And I think that's a cause of great stress in the home and affects the kids greatly. So I think we're seeing that also. So strife in the home is a huge cause. And what do you do about that? I think we have to educate the parents as much as possible to try to come up with some solutions to make the home environment a little bit more happy. And then some of that too involves the parents finding their purpose. Again, it's back to that. If the parents have a great purpose and are using that purpose to help others, and I think that goes a long way to helping with stress in the home, and is a good model for the kids themselves.
You mentioned the buzzword money, and something that I see day in, day out is people just kind of breaking down over money. And I understand that the way the economy is in every country right now it's a dark place, but I've always wanted to ask this to someone because I don't really know how to word it to a normal person that maybe is knowledgeable on these type of topics, but someone who is working in this field medically, probably the best person to ask to. People that are putting a massive importance on money, and it is important in its own right, but it shouldn't be everything. How do they get away from that mindset of money controls everything?
There's a number of things in answering that question. The one is realizing that you don't, again, social media contributes to this, and that is trying to keep up with everyone else that you see. You have to have a nicer car, you have to have a nicer house, you have to have a nice vacation. I think people need to realize that they can still be a success and not take a fancy vacation. And so you can scale down your wants and what you think are your needs. So that, I think, will go a long way. And social media, unfortunately, if the parents are on social media or talking with their friends, they want to have all the best things, but you have to realize that you simply can't. So scaling back your expectations, I think, is one of the solutions to that. So you don't have to spend as much money, and then if you're spending all the money, you end up with credit card debt of $25,000 or something, or more, and that's a huge stress on the family to be in debt. So again, scaling back your expectations and your things that you think you need, which you really don't need. What you need is some kind of a living arrangement. You need food, you need transportation, but lots of other things you don't need. And so I think people, again, need to get away from social media that's influencing their buying habits and their wants. And so I think that's a big one there. But you're right, money is a huge cause of strife, and probably the most significant one in the families in this country today. It's unfortunate.
Is there any way at all that you think kind of psychologically people could almost talk themselves out of that? They always need to have better this, better that. They need to be doing better than this person, doing better than that person. They need to be doing better in this area of their life. Like, is there any way that you think they could talk themselves out of that mindset and just enjoy where they are?
Yeah, I had a patient. Let me tell you a story about one of my patients. We live in a kind of an affluent area. Chicagoland is, there's a fair amount of money and lots of different pockets in the Chicagoland area. And one of my patients was on a pretty successful crew that works on roads and construction, and he was doing quite well. His son evidently wasn't the brightest kid, and there are lots and lots of stresses in school to academically perform, and the kid just wasn't up to that. And so he was bullied a lot because of that, and so he was unhappy. The dad was realizing that wasn't good. He was making good income, but he couldn't, with the income he was making, he couldn't quite afford to keep up with the people around him. And so he decided to move to a different part of the country, take his whole family, move to a different part of the country that had a lower standard of living, and where his income would go a little bit farther. The child enrolled in a public school that didn't have quite the academic standards that some of the schools in the Chicagoland area have, in the suburbs at least. And I've followed him over the years, and what has happened with him and his family, he's transformed his family. His son is happy. He realizes he doesn't have to go to college and graduate school and things like that. He's in the trades. He's very happy with that. He finished school. He wasn't the star student, but he wasn't the lowest student either. He had a happy school life, much happier than he did here. The father, my patient, is extremely happy. He has a job that's not quite as stressful as the job here. He doesn't have to keep up with all the neighbors, and he's a little bit lower standard of living, but he's very happy with that. And his wife is ecstatic. He made a huge change that has worked out, and he is he's a transformed guy, and his whole family is transformed. So I think maybe getting away from the pressures of your home may be something that would work for people. Moving to a different part of the country, moving to an area where you don't have the social pressures to perform and to be the guy with the fanciest car in the neighborhood and the biggest house and so forth. So it sounds like a radical decision, but that worked for him and his whole family, and it was fun to see how transformed this whole family became with that move.
I support it. I've always said it from whenever I very first started on social media that if you're in a bad situation, you have complete control. You should be walking away. You should be leaving. You shouldn't feel guilty at all, because at the end of the day, that if that situation is not going to get any better, how do you expect you to get any better?
Right. That's very true.
So I'm going to finish off the podcast with some questions that the audience has emailed in to me. They're all completely anonymous, but there has been some of them that have been quite broad questions. So I have asked them to give me a little bit of backstory just to help me form the question properly. But if anyone listening wants to send in some questions for the next guest, there is an email in the description as always. So first one is, why do people going through good patches, i.e. improving themselves, fixing their diet, creating healthy routines and habits, always seem to get to a point of self-destruction where they feel it's going too good, so they make a stupid decision out of happiness and end up derailing everything they've just done?
I think what the question, I'll rephrase the question, is why do people who suddenly start to do everything right?
Sorry, Scott, something's happened to your mic.
And then crash. Why do people who are suddenly paying attention to their diet and doing all the right things suddenly crash and burn? And I think it's very similar to I'll see patients in the office and say, well, you need to do exercise, you need to do the things that they need to do to stay healthy, and all of a sudden they'll start an exercise program and they'll hurt themselves because they started to do a treadmill for 2 hours a day and not 15 minutes. And so I think the same thing happens. That's kind of human nature, where we decide to do everything all at once. I'm quitting smoking, I'm exercising, I'm getting up at 4 a.m. to study the Bible, or all those things. And you can't do it all, and you can't do it all at once. You have to take things slowly and realize that one thing at a time. And so if you do too much, it just overwhelms you, and you just can't do it. And then you throw the whole thing out, and you're worse off than you were before. So my advice is to take things slowly. Don't do everything at once. If you want to quit smoking and exercise and diet and so forth, do one of those first. And that's what I advise my patients, because it's too overwhelming to do all that all at once, and then you end up losing everything.
Next one is, when moving away from bad situations or environments that are bringing you down, you experience a very lonely period. Why do people struggle so much in this lonely period, and what causes them to go back running to that bad environment where they know the end result and can't seem to hide away from it?
It's comforting to be in an environment. Change is hard. Change is very difficult, and it's very comforting to be in an environment with friends or colleagues or coworkers or whatever that are destructive. But and they're right. It's lonely to break away. It's lonely to be away from that environment where you can gossip with others. You can listen to their complaints and that are dragging you down. But you're the person that wrote the question is right. It's lonely to make that change. But if you find people that are uplifting, everyone should try to find an environment that helps them, where people can be an example to you and not be destructive to you. But and so one of the things that you might try to do is, instead of making that change all of a sudden, cultivate some additional friendships, so that you don't go through a period where you're alone and not have any friends. it's good to get away from friends that are destructive to you. But at the same time you're doing that, don't do it all at once. Cultivate friends that can uplift you. Find organizations, an art league or a bowling league or something where people enjoy you and be uplifting to you, and then gradually get away from the destructive people. But if you do it all at once, very likely it'll fail because it's uncomfortable, and you like to get back to what's been comfortable for you for years in many cases.
Why do people feel that they can't speak up and admit when they are going through a depressive period?
Depression and mental illness, stigma. It has for years and years. I think we're more open now about mental illness because of things like Kevin Hines, the fellow that tried to commit suicide from the Golden Gate Bridge. People are realizing that it's okay to have a depression, and it's not a stigma that's going to follow you the rest of your life. So I think that's good. But mental illness still is hard to admit. It's hard to admit that I'm depressed, and to your friends and anyone in your even your family. So fortunately, again, like I said, the stigma is getting less and less. And I think the government has something to do with that too. They're promoting mental health and mental treatment for mental illness. And so I think over time, in the last 10 years or so, I think we've come a long way to realizing that this is an illness, heart disease, and so forth. So, but unfortunately, many people are still stuck in that mindset that this is a black mark against them. And hopefully, shows like this will help people realize that it's okay to say I need help. It's okay to say I'm in trouble and I'm depressed, and it doesn't have to be a stigma anymore.
This one was sent with a story, but I won't go into the whole story because he's asked me not to say it on the podcast, but he's asked me to ask this exact question, which is, recently in today's times, I've realized that when people are sad or just going through a rough patch, they automatically cling to mental health as their excuse for having failures and shortcomings. Why has mental health become an excuse, and is it dragging away from those truly in depression?
I think everyone needs to be proud of themselves and happy with themselves. And I think if you're not being successful, if you're not doing well in any aspect of your life, everyone wants to blame it on something. I see that all the time in the office. A person will come in and say, well, I had this car accident, and that's why I have this chronic abdominal pain. Well, it has nothing to do with abdominal pain, but it's that's you have to blame. You like to blame something else, and not yourself. And so I think people are using mental illness in some cases now to for why you can't do something. I can't do that because I'm depressed. And that's unfortunate because people, and especially in today's society, aren't taking ownership for their own actions, and that's a shame. But I think we're seeing that a lot, and maybe we're seeing it more than we saw in the past, which is unfortunate. But that's why people are doing that. I'm sure.
This is actually a good follow-up question. The next one is, what is true depression?
There's a number of things that relate to depression. You can have people, a true medical depression. A medical depression involves chemical changes in the brain, serotonin, norepinephrine, dopamine, those kinds of things. And what the symptoms of a true medical depression would be feeling down in the dumps, loss of interest in outside activities, frequently a weight gain or a weight loss. I tend to gain weight when I go through tough times, but it can be either a sleep disturbance of some kind, either sleeping too much or too little, thoughts of suicide or worthlessness, and then for kids, it involves grades. That grades suffer, You lose interest in your hobbies and on outside activities. Those are the symptoms, and then just feeling blue, feeling down in the dumps. Those are the symptoms of true medical depression. Now, every tragedies and crises in their life goes. That's kind of a reactive depression. So someone dies in the family, and you get depressed. That's a reactive depression, and that's normal. It's normal to be depressed if you invested $100,000 in the stock market and the company you invested in goes bankrupt, or there's a loss in the family, or something like that. That's a reactive depression. Sometimes those can turn into a medical depression, and we're taught in school that many times when you have a reactive depression, your spouse dies or is seriously ill, that can turn into a medical depression and persist. And so we're taught that we might want to more aggressively treat those people with a reactive depression as a true medical depression. So that's kind of how we define depression.
I actually think that answer there may actually speak to people more volumes more than anything we've actually said on this podcast. But the next one is actually, it's kind of related, not really in some senses, but this one was actually one I picked out and starred to make sure I asked it, because we've all seen the fancy ads and TikTok videos of, the guy's life and soul of the party celebrating and shouting, and then it cuts to him in his room crying. And the question that this person asked was, why are the loudest and most bubbly people always suffering the most?
Question. I'll give you an example of that. My wife was involved with plays quite a bit in high school, and she went to the high school where John Belushi, remember John Belushi, the comedian and actor? Yeah. John Belushi was always the life of the party. John Belushi would be, he'd walk into the room, and all of a sudden the room would light up. Everyone would be laughing. He would be making jokes, and he was very, very bright, and he was able to, entertain a whole room of people. But when John Belushi was alone with my wife, for example, and they were talking, sad person. And I think then he ultimately lost his life to a drug overdose. But I think he's a kind of an example of many people that, and this is not everyone, there are some lives of the party that are truly lives of the party, and they are happy people. But it's not uncommon to see a person who is trying to hide their depression or overcome their feelings of worthlessness by being the life of the party and being boisterous and being a lot of fun to be with. So we see that. And again, it's not everyone, but that is not an uncommon thing, and it happened to John Belushi, unfortunately.
The last question, and the reason it's last is because I actually think it is one of the more important questions that need to be asked, but it's not being asked because it's not very glamorous and it doesn't look very good on social media. But this person said, everyone today is talking about how support groups are the best way to combat depression. However, we do need to look at it from a flip side, and it's quite shocking that it hasn't been uncaved yet. How does someone know when it is time to seek medical help?
Okay, let's talk about in reference to depression alone here. So when do you seek medical help when you're depressed? Generally, the answer to that would be when it begins to interfere with your life. If you're not doing the things that you like to do, you're not having fun in life, or especially if you're considering ending your life, those are the times that you want to seek medical help. I saw a kid the other day who was telling me that he is not doing well, and whenever you see a person with depression, you always like to ask, have you ever considered ending your life? And he said, well, I may have done that. And I said, well, then the next question in that series, have you thought about a plan? What would you do? And and sometimes you'll find the answers are shocking. And this kid said, well, I was, I was just thinking about that. And I went into my dad's study, and he has this gun in his drawer. this handgun, and he has bullets in the shells in the other drawer. And I got the gun out and put it on the desk, and then I got the shells out and I loaded the gun with the bullets. And then I decided that maybe something else came up, and I'd put that away for now. That is a kid that obviously, if you have suicidal thoughts and have a plan, that person needs to be seen immediately. So if anyone that's listening to this has had that situation where a person says, I'm really kind of down, and then you ask, well, have you thought about suicide? And then you ask, do you have a plan? That person needs to be seen immediately. But generally, that's not going to be the majority of people. The majority of people are going to be depressed. And when do you seek help? When you can't get out of it yourself by doing activities like exercise and eating right and so forth, and it interferes with your life, that you're not having fun, that you're not doing the things, the hobbies that you liked before, that you're kind of aloof from your family or your friends, and that you find yourself crying a lot and not sleeping, or weight changes, those kinds of things that we see with the depression. Those are the times that you seek help. And there's lots of things that will be available for help. Support groups are helpful. Medications are very helpful. We give medications all the time, and there should be no stigma in taking medication, because they do really work in many cases, restoring the neurotransmitters in the brain. And counseling can be helpful, very helpful. Counseling can be as helpful as medications in many cases. So those are the reasons that you'd seek help, is when it's interfering with your life.
I think that's every base covered, to be honest. And I think the way that you've answered those questions from the viewers, I definitely think it's going to hit home a lot more, because that was, whenever they were writing in, you could tell that they had a lot of questions, because they were writing in with a lot of background, a lot of stories involved with it. And it's amazing to be able to ask these questions to you, because, like I said, there's a lot of people that have these questions. They don't know who to ask, because it doesn't seem right asking someone who's the same as you, someone who lives close to you. It doesn't feel like you're going to get the right answers. So
Right.
For them to be able to ask this now, it's incredible. And I thank you very much for giving them that opportunity. And I also thank you for coming on the podcast. I thoroughly enjoyed this. And there's so much information that we've went into, and so many gems. And I just can't wait to get this edited and uploaded now, because I think that it's going to really touch base with a lot of people.
It's a hot topic these days. It applies to virtually everyone. Everyone's touched by depression, either personally or somebody that they know, or a family member. And so it's been very there's a lot of interest in this topic.
I've no doubt that it hopefully will come down a bit, but doesn't look likely. So I hope that this is something that people can use to come back to over and over again when they do feel like they are hitting that point. But again, Scott, thank you very much for taking time out of your day to come on and do this. You didn't need to, and to come and spread this much knowledge it's like winning the lottery for me. So thank you very much, and no doubt I will ask you to come on again in the future.
That's fine. It was fun talking with you. You asked some great questions, so I appreciate it. I think hopefully this will help some people.